So we're looking at Cleopas and the way that Jesus appeared to him on the road to Emmaus. And as they were walking along, they were confused, they were disappointed. And often we carry that, don't we? This disappointment with God or with ourselves or with others, confusion about Jesus and what God's doing. And maybe we have, like Cleopas, invested emotionally and prayerfully and spiritually and even financially into something that then the authorities, who were meant to support what God was doing, then killed off. And maybe there's some stuff that you want to just pray for each other around that, where you've just been disappointed at what projects or things that have happened, maybe within the church or in your workplace, where you felt God was on the move, and actually it's all rather fallen apart. And that had for Cleopas, and what Jesus does is hear his story, walks alongside him, and that's so important, isn't it? And then Jesus then opens the scriptures to them, and sometimes we can go to all sorts of places before we go to the Bible to help us in our frustration, in our disappointment, and in our sadness. And Jesus made sure that Cleopas understood who Jesus was, gets a spiritual an overview of the situation as Jesus explains who he is from the Old Testament. And that's a fascinating exercise as well, how Jesus endorses the Old Testament and how he expects the Old Testament to speak of him. And so we need to be looking for Jesus all the way through the Old Testament. And then they come into the home, and Jesus is revealed as the Messiah, the one who's been raised from the dead. And they rush back to Peter and the other disciples to tell them the good news that Jesus has indeed been raised from the dead. And I just love the fact that Jesus walks with us in our disappointment, in our sadness, in our frustration, in our difficulty, and it reminds me of the thief on the cross who could see that Jesus was going through the same things that he went through. It reminds me of those scriptures that I will be with you always, that though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, your rod and staff will comfort me. Those verses that talk about help in suffering. And I think it would just be good to minister that to each other and pray for that for each other. I'm conscious too that because Jesus was raised, then actually their confusion was dealt with, their frustration was finished, their sadness was over. And I didn't want to dwell on that because I think that's a bit of a triumphalistic gospel, but there is room for that. So please give testimony, pray, ask God for the breakthroughs, for the triumphs, for the overcoming, for the life of the resurrected Jesus to flood through our circumstances, to take away the grief and the sadness and the sorrow and the frustration as we see God do new things in breakthrough. As he broke out of the tomb, he can break through into our lives too. So have a good time as you talk about these things, and maybe hold those two things in balance too. Okay, bless you. I'll see you in a bit. Bye-bye.